Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for coming to my speech. So, without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to invite you to a speech about demons in products, about demons in user experience, and things that can be a problem when you have consumers trying to access your projects or products. It doesn't have to really be about games. It's about applications. It's about services or things that people consume. So with that said, my name is Miko, and I am a game developer at Vavel Games. I've also recently started doing an AI company that focuses on translation. So currently doing two things. And in terms of the projects that I have worked on over the last decade, they were mostly MMOs, casual projects, multiplayer projects, RPG projects, puzzle games, mobile games, PC games, console games, so you name it. And usually I was in the role of a creative director, where it was really down to me to make sure that the product itself, when it goes to consumers, has some kind of a user experience standard set upon them. And it often came with some problems. And that's the screenshots from my game that we're currently working on. It's a niche. It's kind of like EVE Online mixed with StarCraft and Clash of Clans. And with the AI translation tool that I'm currently working on, it's basically just translation for almost free to all languages. But let's start with this fact that people come in different flavors. I reused it from the last year, but it's very true, and you always need to remember this, that when you have a project that is about to be consumed by another person, it can be a woman, it can be a man, it can be a child, it can be a grandparent, it can be a 40-year-old, it can be a 10-year-old, and it can be an 80-year-old. You will never know what kind of consumers will be accessing your game. You can never make your game as something that will basically work for everybody, but you can try. If you search for gamer, that's the stereotypical, viewpoint of what a gamer is. But really, gamers are everybody. Like almost everybody played a video game in general. It could have been Tetris, it could have been Pong, it could have been The Witcher 3, or it could have been chess. Is a chess player a gamer? Of course they are. They play games. Same with people and persons, like they are different. And let's talk about user experience. Now, in terms of user experience, what it really is and what it boils down to, it's really about the user experience design in a way that you basically have emotions of users, and you try to determine what kind of emotions the users will have during the interaction with your product. So generally speaking, you get a user experience designer to make sure that the user will not be pissed off at your product. That's the most important thing, but there's also other things to consider with user experience design. You have graphic designers, and you have the general user experience designers, So here, they are more user-focused, more about the emotions, whether the players or consumers feel good about the projects that you see. And I must say that with the idea of a title of the speech, User Experience Demons, I thought it's actually going to be fairly easy to come up with those problems, because we have all faced problems while consuming products. But the one thing that I realized after 5 hours of collecting content for the actual speech, that it's actually not that easy to find those examples, because you tend to forget the things that you see if they were really negative. So you wipe it out from your memory. So this is the general list that I made overall of the most serious issues that you can have while you have a project. And starting with the fact that you can have a confusing layout or inconsistent design. So as you can see here, I have little dots as well as tick boxes or arrows. Have your design consistent. Don't be all over the place. Have it more unified. If you're talking about negative things, and the demons are bad, so you probably want to have red crosses instead of tick boxes. But if you have a checklist and you want to say, okay, I've covered all those things, you want to use a checkbox. So make sure that the things that you present actually convey the information you want to convey. It's all about emotions and how the users will get it for them. So let's start with like the first demon that came to my mind, boring and skippable sequences. It's fairly straightforward, but most people don't like to, not be able to skip things. So it's like the 5 stages of unskippable cutscenes. Try to make sure that those who want to skip can skip. Simple as that. Same goes for intrusive ads. I understand that mobile game developers need to make money, but it's about like having a balance. How much you want to annoy your players and how much you want to make, in terms of revenue. That's the way you do it. So another one that's also related to mobile ads, and also I will be kind of jumping between points, and as I was asked to not only make it mobile-centric, but also make it for other games, as user experience is fairly important. So apologies if we're going to be jumping from topic to topic, but we only have 60 minutes to go, and there's 200 slides. So not crediting ads. Just make sure that it's foolproof. If you have a consumer watching an ad for 30 seconds and they don't get their stuff, it's a fairly big problem. So make sure that if your game requires a connection and you watch the ad, have some kind of a fail-safe for that and test it out, or you will have a lot of people quit. So the next one is testing for choke points. And what I mean by that is basically this. If you have a project that you're playing or something and you're going for a flow and you then get stuck, it's a problem. So let's say you're in a tutorial for League of Legends. That's not actually a bug that happened, but I just used this screen. Imagine you go for this one, you're good. You do this one, you're good. And then you click on this button and it doesn't work. This player is most likely just going to quit the game. Like 1% of those players are actually going to go to forum, try to get support, ask their friend. Most of them are just going to straight up quit. So that's important to keep in mind. And this brings me to the next thing, which I don't know if any of you know what this picture is or not, but it's basically called the survivor bias. And back in the World War II, mathematicians in the US were tasked with figuring out which parts of the airplane you need to armor. And the general idea was, well, where you see the bullets, you should put more armor. However, somebody pointed out that, well, the places that you can see the bullets in meant that this survived, and if you hit the engines or the cockpit, if the pilot died, then the plane never came back. So you don't always see the full picture, and you have to accommodate for the survivor bias. So don't assume that the players will always be in front of your screen, as you can have problems because of that. So for example, let's say you have a sequence in the tutorial, very standard Clash of Clans here, where you have to wait out 58 seconds to click Finish Now. We had this issue in our game where you basically have to build a ship and you cannot click on anything else until the ship finishes building, so you can like speed up the progress. And we had a bug that if actually you didn't wait for, like if you waited for 5 minutes and you didn't spend this money, the screen would get stuck. And we actually had a player spend $100 in tutorial to try to figure out how to get through the tutorial. So this happens very rarely, and it's like 1 in 1,000 who's actually going to do something like that. So that's a pretty serious demon to have. Avoid terrible registration methods. I really recommend going to the site. It will give you nightmares, but it gives you a good idea of what not to do really well. Basic things like describe the problem instead of saying you got a problem. Now, Web3 games in specific, with all the kind of wallets you have, it's so convoluted. I have no idea what these things are. How do I register? What to do next? That's something that we need to make sure that if you have users coming in, you do not force them to do 50 things or connect whatever wallets. Let them in the lowest amount of clicks possible. Don't force them to go through all this stuff. That said, we recently launched our new server for the game, Imperium Galactic War, and we actually ran into a very interesting problem with our launcher. So as you can see, this is how the launcher looks by default. It uses the Xsola launcher as a baseline. And what's interesting is that we have a classic version, which is here, and the new crypto server that is here. And what ended up happening is people downloaded the new launcher. It looked very similar to the old launcher, and they immediately clicked install and play the new game. And they didn't realize that they basically need to go to the second window here to access the new version. And we straight up had players who actually played the old version for 2 hours without them realizing it's not the new version. So you might want to explain things. And the simplest fix here is to show that, well, this is the original version and this is the second version. So if you want to have users go into that, well, it's probably better to have this one as first instead of this one. But, it is what it is. So another one that I find as a huge demon user experience is pure navigation and obscure goals. Anyone who played this game will know, or any of the classic FPS games, there was a certain alert to the fact that you were walking around, this area for 3 hours trying to figure out where the elevator is. Most gamers do not like it anymore, and majority of players will quit your game if they're trying to find a stupid door for 5 hours. We have guides and you can have YouTube, but if your game requires that players go to YouTube to play it, you got a problem. Let's just say it that way. So this is basically it. If you need to have this kind of sequence for the player to pass through, it's a problem. Going forward, I want to come to Scooby-Doo. And the way that they had the cartoons designed back in the 50s, 60s. If you had Scooby-Doo and if you watched it, and I assume that basically everybody here watched it, you had those creatures and other things that were interactable, and the children, who were 3, immediately knew that this suit of armor is going to move. You knew that this is not non-interactive, whereas this thing here was going to actually be affected by, the experience or something like that. So if you design your user interface, you need to take this into account. And a good example here, and I cropped this from the internet, didn't make it myself, is Elden Ring, and how you actually have the map situated at first, where you basically break apart the entire screen so that the user actually sees the visual cues of what they need to do, and based on the coloring, based on the mist, and based on the far-reaching area and the pointy edges, you know that this place with a dragon, that's something serious there. So that's also something good. And another demon that often happens, we gamers deserve to have treasure when you go to a waterfall. Remember that. If a gamer goes to a waterfall and there's nothing there, they will be sad. So we deserve it. Now, explain this to me like a 5-year-old. Now, again, if you need a PhD to play a game, it's probably Stellaris or EVE Online. It's probably bad for a majority of consumers. So do not overwhelm your users. Try to do baby steps. Obviously doing an easy, normal, hard difficulty is a good start, but it's not just that. You need to, you can do more. And obviously, if you add a difficulty curve, it's nothing bad. If you are hardcore, you can go in this direction, and there's nothing stopping you with going Mein Leben and just going all out in Wolfenstein. Whereas I would probably play on normal without trying to play the game for 300 hours just to beat it. So entry-level difficulty and user accessibility is the next topic I want to touch upon. EVE Online, well, it's a great game, but it's also a nightmare for any new user to get into. It's one of the hardest games. There's memes about it. That's basically the learning curve for the game. It's not easy. Let's just put it that way. In terms of the types of games you have, obviously they're on a different curve. So you have, the casual games being the easiest to get into, whereas you have the more hardcore and AAA games and most MMOs being a lot harder to get into. I also had a speech last year, so if you want to watch it on YouTube, it's 1,000-hour-long games specifically about that topic. So the next one is making your time available for the game and actually making a game that the player can play in a limited amount of time, or being able to pause it. So not everybody has 2 weekends to play a single round of a certain game. going to throw it at the user immediately with no progression whatsoever. So start out with something like that in terms of user choices. That's how Civilization 5 works. And as you progress, it becomes larger. But make sure you don't do it that you have 1,000 options across 1,000 options that spread to thousands of options, because this is going to overwhelm your users and it's going to be very hard for them to get into the game. You have the example of Path of Exile. So at first, if you look at that, it's very hardcore. But if you actually look how you play the game, you start out with a pathway. So you select your few things, and it's less overwhelming actually. So, but if you were to immediately give them 100 points to allocate, they would be like, what the hell am I doing, you know? Whereas this is actually well-paced and the game is well-received and millions of players enjoy it. So that's an example of good design. So a few examples of skill trees. I guess got a good voice. One example of a good design of a skill tree is Skyrim. I recommend anyone who hadn't played Skyrim to check it out and use that. Now, another example of how not to overwhelm your user is World of Warcraft. Also, look, you have nothing around in the early stage. You only have like the marking points. You don't have 1,000 user interface elements. And then you get to this. So this is like the World of Warcraft endgame, and you have a lot more stuff. But then the users actually know what is going on. So the next daemon is cluttered layouts and poor navigation. So let's have a look at a few things. So firstly, this is an example of World of Warcraft. Again, don't show this to users at first. Later on, I guess they can manage. This is examples of cluttered UIs according to Google. You've all seen it. Like, don't do that. Just clean it up. Remove stuff. Less is more often. Again, another example. Just try to find cluttered design like examples. It was not actually easy to do that. So let's get to accessibility. I want to start out with everybody who has eyesight problems. I myself have perfect eyesight with some issues, but I generally speaking see everything well. And to me, it's very hard to actually understand and realize what the world looks like for people who have very severe eye problems. And this is an example of what it looks like. So the next thing to consider is that there's a lot of gamers who play those games. And if you, oh, what the hell happened? Accessibility, I guess. Interesting. Okay, so it's important to consider, and that's a fact, that people with glasses generally have more money than people without glasses, as statistic, and they even paid to see you. So that's important to consider, especially if you're a free-to-play game. Those people are going to be able to spend thousands of dollars on your game, whereas those people without glasses probably won't, you know? So let's get to the next topic. When you play a game, you generally don't take Adderall, you don't snort cocaine so that you have like those eyelids just to go like crazy to be peak performance. No, you relax after a hard day to relax on a video game. So you have a beer or something else, and you're not going to be able to click through a very complicated interface. Like that's a fact. So I'm in a group called Heroes of Might and Magic on Facebook, and it's a group for alcoholics, I think, because they just post how they play the game. And the general consensus is that you can learn every alcohol brand in Europe from that group. And this should put some realization to you that majority of those players, adult players who can spend money on your game, will be drinking Maker's Mark while playing your game. So keep that in mind. Become your audience, drink life your audience. So basically, when you're going to be designing those games, it might be a good idea if you're an adult to try some of those beverages, because it's going to allow you to experience the game like your users. The next one I want to talk about is color blindness. Again, I'm not colorblind, but you can see for yourself if you are. I found out that there's an interesting color blindness that I didn't really know about, that if you have dark blues and blacks, it's actually hard for those peoples to distinguish. So if you have deep purple and dark blue and black, it's basically the same color for like 5% of men. So that's also very important to keep in mind. And, different types of color blindness, obviously, whereas like 10% of the population is affected by this. So it's also important to make sure that your games are ready for colorblind people. If you have a casual game, I have no idea what this game is. I just found a match 3 kind of style game. If you don't have shapes in them, like Candy Crush Saga has, if you're colorblind, you're not going to be able to play it. If you have Candy Crush Saga, which is a very well-designed game that makes a lot of money, it's going to accommodate almost all the users that it can, get into it. So that's a piece of design that's very useful to have. And even if you look at the different shadings, if you go into the deep blues or dark blues, if you have the just grayscale, it still is very distinguishable. You can tell apart all the game elements. Whereas in the previous one, it's just all boxes basically of different shades. So it's very hard to play that kind of a game. Again, with traffic lights, this is what traffic lights look like. And here, if you're colorblind. So reds are actually very hard to contrast. So as you can see, the red light is kind of like, hidden. So that's also important to know. If you ever went to a film school, they'll tell you that red always destroys contrast. So keep that in mind. Accessibility, language barriers. Bad or no context. So one of the things, as I said, I was working on is a translation tool. And I personally believe that having your game translated at all is better than not having it translated at all. So even if you were to use Google Translate, don't say that the game is, let's say if you have it on Steam, don't say that the game is translated into the following languages if you use Google Translate, because you will get negative comments, but it may be a very nice thing to actually add a bonus, like a mod, into the settings to even have a Google translated version of your game, or use our solution. Because if you do not basically permit the use, let me see that. So basically, if you do not allow that, you will lose out on a lot of players who don't speak English or other languages. Now, in terms of context in translation, there are some problems. So if you use Google Translate, if you have a steel bar, it can mean the following things. It can be rebar, it can be a bar like a gold bar, it can be a place where you drink, it can be a space bar, it can be the bar association, and many other things. So Google Translate does not understand that this is the context, however, or a loading bar. However, if you have a solution like ours or ChatGPT that enables you to actually understand the context, even if there are typos, as long as the user understands it, it's a far better experience than not having it for those people. And majority of people don't speak other languages. So yeah, those are the bars we were talking about in that game. Again, a lot of people play games in different languages, and just a few examples from Heroes of Might and Magic, how you can have translations. And a well-designed game is going to be able to play with regardless of the language. So you should be able to play your game even if you have no idea what those weird-looking letters mean. You should still be able to play this. So that's a good test. If your game can be designed with all the interfaces kind of blurred out or had like in a different language, that means that your game is well designed. So keep that in mind. And another example of a paradox in translation, if you have a white dwarf, in our game we had a white dwarf corporation, it could mean those two things, and Google Translate usually said this one, so like it was belonging to Biały Krasnolud. But if you have a sci-fi game, you obviously mean the star, but if you have a modern game, it could be like Wolf of Wall Street kind of dwarf. So let's proceed. Flashing lights. That's also something that people forget about, especially like on Discord with GIFs. Don't do flashing lights because it can kill somebody. Like, don't do that. Flashing lights, always put a warning because some people can have epilepsy problems. And while I'm personally not affected, most people aren't. it could literally kill somebody. I'm not even talking about the lawsuit implications if you literally kill somebody with your video game. Just keep in mind that some people might be affected, and you want to go to bed at night and not think about demons and nightmares like that. So let's proceed. So next one is slow load times. That's also a good one, and I mean, we've all experienced this. So waiting for your application to load. I personally believe that if you can optimize the load time of your product, it's always better. So if you have to choose between having a preloaded texture, I think this is from Elder Scrolls Online. It also looked like that in Star Wars: The Old Republic, while you had the assets loaded. It's a lot better than not allowing the player to play before the 20 gigabytes or whatever amount downloads. And anyone who played this game will know how long the loading takes from disk. So yeah. Okay. Again, right now it's no longer a problem in most cases if you have a 70 gigabyte or 116 gigabyte game, but there are still people who have issues with loading their games and having a very slow internet connection. And take it from the actual websites and applications that are for web, that the slower your website loads, the more people are likely to just quit it. So just keep that in mind. There is one exception from League of Legends when it comes to loading, where League of Legends actually purposefully makes the loading of the game longer, and it's completely random, or at least it used to be completely random, so that everyone could see the nice skins that your friends or you yourself had, and it's a nice psychology trick to make people buy your skins in the game. So that's why it just loaded longer. Whereas Heroes of the Storm, I believe, basically enabled you to instantly get into the game, and that was one of the selling points. Well, little did they know that it was also one of the main monetization points for League of Legends. And well, there's one of those games is active while the other one is not. Oh, how the hell do I turn that on? Accessibility of different devices, I guess. Oh God. Okay. And now we got a mouse. Okay, dobra. So poor readability. I mean, look at that. Like, there's so much stuff. Nobody is going to read text from your game. Like, try to avoid throwing walls of text. 99% of people don't even read books. I understand that it's nice to educate people and have them read, but if your interface in the tutorial requires that somebody reads a little booklet, it's a bad design. So here's an example. I have no idea what this game is, to be honest, but it's some survival game. I just found it because it has a really cluttered design of the UI. There is so much stuff that you have here, and the general readability of that is very problematic. Whereas if you take Diablo, for example, or World of Warcraft, the actual layout of the design, and they've spent a lot of money on user experience and UI design at Blizzard. So like the UIs, if you want to see a good UI, play the new StarCraft, play Diablo, play World of Warcraft, because they spent millions of dollars making sure that their design is very good. If you compare the information from the two slides, this one and the other one, side by side, I mean, you basically have very similar stuff here and very similar stuff here in terms of what you actually present to the user, but you can actually understand what's going on here, and this is like, well, a mess. This is another example that I found, like, I have no idea what is going on here, and if this is the first screen that your user goes to, they will freak out and they will be lost. Again, an example of a UI, like there is so much information here, it's very hard to read. This, I'm not even talking about that one, that's like Daemon itself. I also found an example of an old app of some GPS, and like the amount of information that you're presenting here, there are duplicates of the same data on and on, here and there. There's a lot of ways that you can just simplify the UI just so that you don't clutter it. So like this is generally a good example, like have less text, have the bigger buttons, have bigger images, less text. That's like the general design. Have less options in the bottom menu instead of having more. Don't do like little doodads and things that distract your users. That is good UX versus bad UX. Again, I'm not sure what this game is, just found it as an example. It's good to actually add edges around your inventory space. Because in this case, everything kind of looks like everything is together. Whereas if you had some kind of a grid or something that would actually help you distinguish the items from one another, it makes it a lot easier to read, especially if those tips of the swords are touching themselves. A good example is Warframe and how their inventory system works. They also spend a lot of money on iterating their UI over the years. I mean, this game had like 20 iterations of the interface over the last 10 years. So I really recommend playing this game and checking out the interface and how Warframe works. Another demon that comes to my mind that's fortunately no longer a problem, but I actually faced it last time when I was playing The Witcher 3. When you were galloping on your horse, I think they wanted to do this like thing where you poke the horse with, I don't know what's in English, but it's ostrogi, and you like go sprint. So see, gallop, press twice, left shift, center hold left shift. Every time the horse went into a tree, it would stop galloping, and you then had to press again. And since you already had the W pressed, you didn't press other keys, so you press shift multiple times in a row, and then you get this like bad notification. So just keep that in mind to avoid pressing shift multiple times in your game. So over-complications. In Polish, the word is przerost formy nad treścią, or triumph of form over content. This is something that I remember from a game called Stronghold series. In this specific scenario, your goal is to take over this castle, and then you need to take your units to hide them in the swamp. I don't think I read that, or I misunderstood it. I won, and then the timer came and I basically lost, because you were supposed to basically move those units. The better design would be that after you lose, you basically cut to a cutscene and you take your units automatically to this area. Like, don't explain it in text, because most people will not realize it. Like, there is no added value from the fact that you force the user to select all the units and click here. Do the time shorter. You can do a lot of things, but make sure that you do not overcomplicate things for your users if it's unnecessary and if it doesn't really add value. Because all you had to do is make a cutscene, show them that they're in the swamp, and say, with all your units in the swamp, everybody, came home safely. So the next thing is, don't always change bad habits. And that's an interesting one, because sometimes there are things that are better or worse, but they aren't good to change because everybody's used to that. So most of the people around the world drive on the right lane, but I don't think that the Brits will agree with that if somebody decided to change the way that they drive. So this is an example from League of Legends. I'm not sure if anybody actually experienced this, because this was one day throughout the history of the game where they decided to change the UI a bit. So if you look here, you have on the interface the kill count, which is a very important statistic, and basically everybody is looking at that frequently. And you have the minimap, which allows you to see where your opponents are, stuff like that, and your general map awareness, so you can see that somebody's getting ganked, etc. You also have your health bar, which is here as well as here, and then you have the information about your friends and how they are either dead or how they're doing, as well as your general statistics. So this is one of the older designs of the UI, and they decided to make a change, and this change was smart from the perspective of a designer. You want to focus the attention of the user here, so that you have your friends, you have your kill count, and you have the time, and you have the minimap all in one place. By design, it makes total sense, and it's smart. It's good. I fully say that this is a great idea. However, as at the time a diamond player, my skill in this game dropped to like a gold player immediately because I could not actually understand what the hell is going on. I was used to like looking here and then I had to look here. Like I was constantly just in a state of not knowing what the hell is going on, basically. So they reverted this change literally after a day. They did a rollback. And let me just click through. So the UI has actually changed in the end. And they took the items from the left and they actually moved them to the right. But before I get to that, it's important to actually see where your attention in the game needs to be. So, for example, you need to look at the main screen as well as on this side, usually. So the way that they changed the UI is they made the UI bigger, generally. They still keep the kill count in the upper right corner. The abilities and your character is now here. And your friends are going to be here. So let me just move that. So if you look at the actual breakdown of what is important and relevant, you have like a gray blob that usually you don't look there. Obviously, if you have an enemy coming here, your attention is going to shift 100% here. That's why actually the left side, the blue side, is usually winning. So it's like the better side in League of Legends because it's facing the other side. So on average, the players are playing better on this side than if they are playing on the other side. Just going back to this, if you look at the screen right now, like this is the information that they're actually presenting to the user. So keep in mind where the user actually looks while they play your game. By the way, where do I need to click so that it changes? Like there or here? Okay. So it confuses people if that happens. And in case of League of Legends, I think they currently have it well so that, again, the kill count's here, the friends are here, so no longer here. All the relevant information is here. And they even, before they actually had this item back in here, so they shifted all those items to the right so that the attention of the user can be on the right side of the screen. And if you look at it, it actually gives you almost the perfect ratio, the Fibonacci area. So like the Fibonacci is actually very relevant to show. I should have added it to the presentation, but yeah, it's like the 2/3 of everything ratio. So yeah, it confused people. Now, mobiles and the limitations of fingers. Again, if you're a mobile developer, you need to consider the screens, especially if you have a small screen versus a long screen. Like if you have a large phone that's almost like a tablet, I don't like those personally. The degree where you can click differs. So this is like I found it on the internet. It's a general representation where it's hard and easy to click. Also, keep in mind that with the new iPhones, where you don't have this button here, you actually swipe up to get out of an application. So try to avoid the swiping up motion on the bottom of the screen wherever you can. And so we actually had an issue that we found out while we were testing our game with children. So a friend of mine came with their kids, and I realized that in our bubble game, bubble shooter game, the users were actually obscuring this area, which I was playing it differently with my thumb, but because they were playing it with their middle index finger, they would actually put their finger on top of this area, so they would not be able to see the actual bubbles that are coming next. So those are little details that you need to keep in mind while you are designing your game. So like this area is basically blank. Now, inconsistent design, that's also important. Like, make sure that the UI is recognizable to the user. If they used a cross once, do not use something else for the same thing. So this is a good example of bad design. Like, keep it consistent so that it is the same always. Again, buttons should be designed well, and look how it's blurred. That's how people with eyesight problems are going to actually be looking at it. If you have different designs, it's going to be harder for them to distinguish buttons, because this means that they need to learn more aspects of the interface. If you always use the same red cross for the exit, they only need to find that once. again, use the same unified interfaces, because if you don't do that, it doesn't look professional and good. So something like that versus the one on the left. Features mistaken for bugs. That's also something that is often forgotten when it comes to user experience. And it's very counterintuitive because when, for example, we have a game feature that a lot of people do not understand, and we get the same report and we have to reply, no, this is not a bug, this is how it works, and that's how it is, it's fine. It maybe is a bug, because to them, they actually think that this is a bug. So it might be good to consider feedback like that. And yeah, so you need to consider the different types of perspectives of your game. And keep in mind that something can be very offensive, for example, to one user, while it will not be offensive to another. And that comes with like cultural appropriation, using, hate symbols, stuff like that. That's obviously a quite hardcore variant, but still, it's important to consider this. There is something that actually was a terrible experience in one of my favorite games of all time. So The Witcher 3, if you don't want to hear spoilers for the game, like close your ears. But yeah, so I see people holding ears. But basically, you have an option to have a choice whether you have a drink with Siri or you don't. And to me, it made sense, like, hell yeah, I would like to drink with Geralt or with Siri. So I thought that this is a good thing. However, it turned out that she died, and everybody died because of my decisions. I actually thought that they were good, but like I had the worst possible ending despite actually trying to get the good ending. So it could upset some people, even if you have a different viewpoint, because, alcoholism is bad and, you'll die if you drink kind of mentality, I guess. But still, try to avoid upsetting people so that, you don't have to get an angry mob coming to you. And it's often good to just collect the feedback and listen to people because in general, if you don't, it's a problem. And as you can see, like, this is the same game, I think. And one person said, you will lose your whole life playing this game. And they played for 4,000 hours, while you have another person who plays 6,000 hours, and they say, it's a pretty good game, I like it, So same thing goes for both sides, and you can never appease everybody, but it's still important to collect the feedback, because if you don't collect your user feedback, you can have problems. So thank you very much, and I hope you appreciated the talk. And yeah. I think we have 10 minutes for questions if anybody wants to ask anything.
In which situations do you think playing with gamers' expectations is valuable? For instance, when you change rules of the game, or like in this case, user interface on purpose to just make the experience refreshing.
So it's a good question, and I think Steve Jobs said it that you design the game, like the product, in a way before the user will actually know that they wanted it. I think that's kind of how he said it. So sometimes you basically need to design your product with features that the users still do not know that they will want. But obviously, if they are so entrenched, like in case of League of Legends, where you have a situation where the user who is playing the game for 10,000 hours has muscle memory in this case, and they actually constantly look in this area, and they do it by default. They don't think about it. They do it subconsciously. If you try to force a habit, it becomes very problematic, and you have to balance it out. You probably, like, the appropriate way for League of Legends to do it, in my opinion, was roll out the feature to all new users, but by default, if they were an existing user, make it in the settings so that you have classic control versus inverted control or something like that. So by default, they have a different version that you play. I remember that while I was playing Tibia, if you ever tried that game, everybody who starts playing Tibia says, when you start playing, go to the settings and change classic control out so that you can immediately click, though those settings are made so that you can play it on Mac. So again, it's like it's always a balancing act, and you can never make it good enough for everybody, but you can try.
I think there is a regulation in Finland that people born after 2000 cannot buy cigarettes, but people born earlier are still allowed to. So it's kind of appreciation you're talking about, I think.
Yeah, I mean, look, I personally believe that people are free to do whatever they want with their own bodies and lives. So in this case, I personally do not like smoking cigarettes, and I think it's bad for health. But again, well, you could say that not smoking is good because then the health system is going to be easier for everybody. But again, if they choose to do so, it's kind of up to them, and it's a bit silly that some users get to do something while other users don't. So I think by default, if you don't want to anger your consumers, you should make it in a way that you get the choice to do so. Like, you're not forcing them, but again, you should kind of guide them to do something that that they can do in order to have that experience. So again, new users get it by default, but the old users, you don't even show it to them. You just say that, hey, there's this option, you can revert it, or you can let them try it and then say you can revert it any day. So have like a pop-up for a week or when they play, like, hey, there's a new setting. Like, if you want to revert it to the default that you used to use it, and then everybody's going to be fine with that. So they will have no problems, I think.
see your point. Thank you.
There.
Thank you for your lecture. It's very beautiful.
Thank you.
And I have question. Maybe you have advice about ultimate save icon.
Ultimate what?
Save game state, save icon.
Okay. So like, how do you save game, and how do you describe it to the user?
To the user in one icon. For example, for my generation, it's normally show diskette.
Yeah.
For new generation, I don't know what I can show. Maybe you know what I can show to this generation. For this generation,
it's. I think that it's nice that the disk has evolved from a diskette, like you said, to floppy disk to being actually the universal save symbol. So I think if you show it to the user and you write save, it's a very short word. So just save is 4 letters. So it's not a problem with attention span if you have it. It's obviously, if you have cloud save, you have like those little arrows or like clouds pointing upwards, like Wi-Fi, I guess. But I mean, I never really had this problem in my games with saves because basically my game is always persistent. It's an MMO, so even if your computer burned, you would still have the same progress as you're just a remote accessing the game. So we always have the save. But I mean, generally speaking, saving, like, you should just have a button that says save, I guess, and then have a confirmation that it was saved. And in this case, it's just a green button or a tick or something like that with a green color. So those who are still colorblind can see that it's a tick, and they'll be able to distinguish it, and then just have letters to actually explain it. So use multiple visual cues to allow this. So have letters, so a simple word that's not long. You can't have save button that has 50 letters, because people will get confused, and most languages, I believe, have it fairly simple. Like in Polish, it's zapisz, so that's like 7 letters, but that's still short. And I think that's the easiest way to explain it to the user, I believe. But always use multiple visual cues to make it easier. Even if somebody has a problem with a certain aspect of it, then they can still.
Okay,
do
you
it.
mean you must, me must use an icon and text
Yeah, I
to
mean,
describe user
icon,
what he's
text,
doing.
colors, and I think generally speaking, text probably makes more sense in most cases. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
But again, A/B test it if in your game and see what people understand better. Have a very old person play it and a very young person play it, and that's going to give you very good feedback on what you should do.
Thank you. A/B testing.
Cool. There's a question behind.
Thank you for a talk. You touched a topic that concerns me a lot recent years, which is political over politeness and so on. You said that we should never make players anger and so on, especially when it's connected to something that's very touchy and very sensitive topic. But on the other hand, I feel that the more we do that, the more the big games especially lose style and sometimes a sense of humor and so on. Basically, all games become very muddy and basically the same because nobody wants to step on anybody's foot and fall into the pitfall that
Not being edgy.
being edgy and so on. So, do you have any thoughts on that? How to manage the risk of stepping on anybody's feet?
Well, I mean, I actually did have to some degree, like in my last speech, things about that. So if you haven't seen it or been on it, I recommend checking it out. But you will never be able to accommodate everybody. We can talk about it in detail after the speech. But to say that, I think you need to make a balance. Do you want to maximize your audience versus do you want to make it for somebody in specific? If you have a game like Hatred, that is purely driven as a controversy, then you just go all out. You don't pull back any punches. You're gonna piss off everybody on the left, but everybody on the right, or most at least, will like it. Let's say, so you need to balance it out between those who you want to keep versus those who you will basically lose out. So it's just a balancing act and what you want to do with your product. And ultimately, it's up to the developers and publishers and creators to basically choose what they want to do. So thank you very much. And I'm going to let the next person talk. So thank you.